Welcome to the Cambridge Neuroscience Interdisciplinary Seminar Series. This series features current work from across the schools and departments of the University of Cambridge, reflecting the pioneering work and diverse interests of members of Cambridge Neuroscience. Cambridge Neuroscience is currently going through quite a detailed consultation process to develop 6 new themes for the research we do here. Each of the next 12 talks will come from one of the 6 new themes, 2 from each. For more info on the themes and the talks covered in this series, please follow the links below and follow us on Twitter at CamNeuro. So with that, it just leaves me to welcome Fumiya. It is a real pleasure to have you speak at our interdisciplinary seminar series. For those of you who are regular attendees of the series, you really realize that we have really covering the breadth of neuroscience across Cambridge and its many departments. So Fumiya is actually a Professor of Robotics at the Department of Engineering here at Cambridge, and he's the director of the Bio-Inspired Robotics Lab, but also the director of the Cambridge Observatory for Human-Machine Collaboration. So with that, I'm not going to go on any further, and I'm going to pass over to you, Fumiya, and thank you again.
Okay, yes, thank you, Debbie. I think this is a great opportunity for me to introduce our research project in this community of neuroscience in Cambridge. And I'm a bit nervous today because I see lots of unfamiliar names in the participants, and I'm really worried about how this talk will be received by all of you. But my areas of expertise is basically robotics and engineering department. And many of you might be wondering why robotics is interested in neuroscience, and what can I tell about neuroscience and anything else in front of this community. But we actually have a lot of interest in neuroscience, cognitive science in general, from an engineering point of view, and that's the main mission statement of our group, in fact. So Bio-Inspired Robotics Lab, I'm leading for the last 10 years or so, is really looking at the intersection between biology and the robotics, and try to understand what's the fundamental difference between animals and machines, and hoping to improve technologies inspired from nature, but also trying to gain additional insight in biology by applying engineering methodology. So I just trying to give you today a flavors of what we are doing, what we have been doing. And we're extremely interested in how we can do the set up collaboration with the neuroscientists, cognitive scientists in this community. So hopefully this is going to be a good starting point of such a collaborations in the future. So embodied artificial intelligence, or embodied intelligence in short, this is a kind of common theme in our research in the last 10 years or so. In order to really put together biological intelligence and artificial intelligence coming together. And the robotics, we think, plays a very essential role in this context. So this is something I want to talk about. Just to give you initial inspiration, so why we are interested in biology in the first place. So one of the videos, the favorite videos I have been using for many years now, is this dog robot, bipedal dog robot. And this is a dog called Faith. It's very famous in the community of locomotion research because there has been long-standing debate about whether quadruped animals can ever walk and run with 2 legs, and this is actually the living examples. We have been always interested in this because our robots, no matter how hard we design it, our robots can never ever do this, right? So if the system is designed for the 4 legs function, then if chop off 2 legs, they're not going to survive as we want. So we really want to understand where this adaptability and intelligence of nature comes from, and what's the fundamental difference between animals and machines. And just a little bit about this dog. So this dog was born without front legs, in fact, and but owners of this dog managed to teach her how to walk, run, stand up, eat, sleep, scratch your back, all these things necessary for survival without front legs. And this is something we really want to understand. Where is this adaptability of the biological system come from? And obviously we need to think about a lot about the neuroscience, cognitive science in this context. So that's something I want to discuss about. So the starting point of our discussion is always this. So this is the slide borrowed from Professor John Garton, and everyone of you should know him, right? So he says in many of his lectures that this is the most interesting aspect of biology. This is scalability of animals, starting its life with one cell and then grow over in enormous scales. And in human case, we become like the bag of cells with 10 to the 13 cells. And this is not only about numbers, but the diversity of components are really impressive. The brain is one important part of it, but it's not the only part. There are many, many different parts in our bodies. And this diversity is really, really impressive. And how we can do it in an artificial way is still a huge question. And that's one of the big challenges we're interested in. Dynamics of the structure is another big thing. So our body is continuously changing over time, and let's say millions of cells are replaced in every minute. And that's something we should also think about. Our body is never be static, and we need to really think about how the dynamic body can be achieved if we want to achieve very adaptive systems. So that's one part of a big mystery from engineering point of view, how we can solve such a problem from engineering point of view. And another piece of a puzzle is here, the genomic side. Right? If you look at our human DNAs, it's said that something like 700 megabyte, 1 gigabyte, depending on how you count, the amount of information stored in human genomes. And this sounds like a lot of information, but compared to the complexity of our body, it's actually incredibly small amount of information. This how we can fill the discrepancy between the information in the genome and the actual complexity of our body is a really huge question. Because if you look at the simple calculation, number of cells divided by amount of information in genome. So 1 bit of information in genome is something like 1,800 cells. So 1 bit information basically in charge of design of 1,800 cells. And that's kind of an incredible scalability. And if we want to really understand the whole organism, looking at genome is not enough, right? We need to really think about how genomes is put in the context of developmental process. And that's something we need to understand if we capture the nature of human intelligence and other animals' intelligence. So this is a kind of really, really big picture. We're starting from how we can do bio-inspired robotics, because there's a huge discrepancy between animals and machines, and how we can approach such a 100-year research question in this area. So let me just start with some of the examples, the focus area that are related to brain, because that's something we are enormously interested in, because that is one of the important organs in our body. So one of the really interesting things about the growth of brain in nature is that the brain really grows together with the rest of the body. So this is the rather recent papers in Science and the Royal Society interface showing that how brain and body grow together. So from very beginning of our life, like week 3, this green part of this little creature represents the nerve cells. So we can see in our organ, in our life in the early stage. So we already see the brain nerve cells at the beginning of life, and then it grows together with the rest of the body. So in week 3, week 4, week 7, we see slowly how our the internal organs and the sensor system and so on, taking shape together with the brains. And then by the week 9 and the before birth, our body is pretty much in the shape of humans. So it's really important to think about this early stage of growth in our life, because this is the time when the most of the structure the basic structure of our life emerges, and we are interested in this process. Although it's not very well known in nature, I think this is a place where robotics and biology can work together. So we have been really exploring how we can understand this stage of a developmental stage of biological system to be interpreted from engineering point of view. So if we're dealing with robotics, we want to really understand how we generate the motions of our body. So probably one of the most basic foundation of the motion generation is something to do with reflexes, especially the spinal reflexes we're interested in. So we have been looking at this aspect of the human development for quite some time now. So what we are looking at is that we first of all need to simplify a lot how our body is structured and coordinated. So what the simplest model we're thinking about is taking the central brain as one big chunk, and this communicates with the muscles through a spinal cord. And the spinal cord is relatively simple compared to the central brain, so we can probably have a look at it in more details. But of course, we have a lot of important circuits in our spinal cord, and this is probably a good start for the roboticists to look at. So the reason we're interested in the spinal reflexes is because this directly tractable by looking at the muscle motion and actions and through the communication with the nervous systems. So our muscles, most of our muscles actually communicate directly with our spinal cord, and we get the sensor signals out from the muscles, and then give the motor signal out of the spinal cord. And this group is actually the building block, so to speak, of our basic motion. So we know a lot about the spinal reflexes, and we can extract some basic principles like myotatic reflex. When you have some weight on your muscles, the muscle try to go against this the exerted force. And the reciprocal inhibition reflex is basically how we can get the two muscles coordinated each other when they are in an antagonistic arrangement. And on the other hand, if you have too much force acting on your muscle, then the reverse myotatic reflex is triggered so that you don't destroy muscle, you stop going against the force. And then obviously we have a withdrawal reflex that is reacting to the external stimuli, such as touching fire or some pain. So this is a really basic building blocks of our motion. Then it probably is a good start for roboticists to thinking about how we can understand these behaviors from an engineering point of view. Although this is rather primitive motions, it's actually very, very hard to think about this if you complex coordination of actions, such as this leg or foot stepping into something painful. There's so many things happening in our spinal cords just to activate a couple of muscles in the coordinated fashion. But also we are maintaining the balance so that we don't fall down while you're taking actions and so on. So this is a really, really basic, well understood circuits from neuroscience point of view. But on the other hand, it's extremely difficult for engineers to design such a thing, because we as an engineers, we don't really have mean to program such a bottom-up actions. We can actually have a lot of small reflexes, but we don't really know how to put them all together in a coordinated fashion. So this the coordinated behaviors of bottom-up motion blocks, the primitives, are really interesting challenge from engineering point of view. So this is a starting point that we have started collaboration with a neuroscientist, and one of our main contacts, Mark Brumberg from in the US, is a neuroscientist of the motor neurons. Started looking into this problem of muscle twitches. So the question we realized is that how we can do association between the neural signals on the switchboard and the actual reaction and actual outcome of this motor signals as a result into behavior. So this is a really nice analogy that how we can make an association with the input and output relationship if we don't know anything about the pathways in between. So one of the hypotheses we're looking at is the so-called muscle twitch hypothesis, meaning that our random muscle twitches when you see especially during the sleep, your muscles voluntarily activated without our conscious decisions, and we are hypothesizing whether this kind of twitches could be interesting to look at if this learning of reflexes can happen in a self-organized fashion. So here I'm not going to go into details of neuroscience because I don't know much about it. But the idea here, though, is that how the neural signals and the motion of the limbs and the resultant behaviors are related to each other. So Mark is doing a lot of detailed research about how these signals are related to the actual resultant behaviors. And then we're actually trying to understand from engineering point of view how this the muscle twitches could be the origin of the control of a body. So what we look at from engineering point of view is basically putting everything together in computer simulation. So we have some sort of musculoskeletal system. So we are interested in how we can build the bio-inspired robots. So we have the simulation model of musculoskeletal body and environment. So then our hypothesis has to be tested in the neural circuits, the simplified neural circuit. Here we have a motor system, sensor system. They are put together in some artificial neural network. And then we think about how this artificial neural network can actually pick up anything out of the sensor motor coordination interacting with the environment. So the hypothesis here is the spontaneous motor activity. This is the muscle twitch model that can give the random activation signals to the motor system. And then we see how this learning process can pick up any interaction between sensor and motors. And we try to be as plausible as possible, that we put the Behaviour learning as a neural network, and we put some the heel type muscle models in the motor system. And then we have sensors as muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs and so on. And then we try to understand how muscle twitches could contribute to the learning of spinal reflexes. So the simple experiment we did is simulation experiment. We start with a really simple format, and we have two muscles and one joint connected to each other, and the muscle has a spindle and the Golgi tendon organs. We have the exteroceptive sensor that we can feel the touch. So if we have a very simple configuration like this, we can do simple simulation. If you have a twitch on the one motor, we can see the sensor signals in both muscles. So we have a direct muscle contract on the blue side, and then but still we see the muscle spindle reaction on the other side of muscle, whereas we don't see much force acting on the other side because this one should be passive. And then we feel some resistance in the end effector and so on. So we can actually see simple reaction like this in the simulation, and we can activate the random switches in such a system. So the interesting thing about this simulation experiment is that even if we start with neural network model, sensors and motors connected in the full connections, through this kind of simple random muscle twitches, some of the connections can be reinforced and others can be pruned out. So this is a kind of basic principle, like how the reflexes can be developed through the random trigger of actions. And then we can actually see how far we can go with such a simple system. So the really interesting thing about this approach is that this is a really self-organizing system, that what we don't need to do pretty detailed design of each muscles and each sensors, but this connection between sensor and motors can be self-organized through the random interactions. So if you extend this one joint, two muscle model in more complex fashion, like a two joint, four muscles, we can actually develop the correlation between sensor signals and motor outputs in a very structured way. So this is after training, we can pick up this correlation between sensor and motors, and we can increase the complexity, two joint, 8 muscles, or in any arbitrary number of joint and muscles. And we can still pick up some correlation in some way. So that's a kind of very interesting first step to understand how the self-organization of reflex can happen. So obviously, the next step we're really interested in is how complex we can go. So one of the things we did for this post-computational biology paper is that we tried to build up some, this musculoskeletal configuration in a bio-plausible fashion. So this is a two joint, like a hip joint and knee joint that is connected by 8 muscles. And in a mammalian fashion. So we have some of the joints connected in this monoarticular connection, and some other muscles connected over 2 joints, and so on. So the sensor motor coordination, this kind of configuration is not trivial, right? Because some motor actions can trigger other muscle sensors, but not all of them. So the relationship is not very clear. But we can do the self-organization of this through the muscle twitches, and we can actually develop something like that. So we can see some videos of this experiment. So we have at the beginning, we have some random twitches of muscles, and we see how the twitch of one muscle can induce the behavior of a large-scale body. And that's the training part of the reflexes. But then what's more interesting is how we can use this afterwards. So once we develop such a connection of reflexes, then this kind of connections can be used for basically behaviors like a jumping behavior. So here we actually see, if you look at it carefully, we see how the muscles are coordinated to each other when it touches down the ground and so on. So this is really interesting starting point, that the basic self-organization principle can lead to developing complex behaviors of a group of muscles, and that's the starting point when we are looking at how what we can learn from neuroscience to develop robots in the future. So our robots we build is not very complex as this one, but we're hoping that we can continue with this one, because if you look at something like a bipedal locomotion, there's a recent research by Helmut Geyer and Hugh Hare that the bipedal locomotion can be purely achieved by reflex circuits. So this is the example that we implemented quite some bio-plausible reflex circuits in the leg, and it can reproduce very stable locomotion behavior, at least in simulation. We still don't know how to build such a robot in reality, but this is a kind of significant step forward to how we can make our robot leg locomotion more closely to biological systems. So this is a kind of introduction, like how we can do the neuroscience and the robotics coming together for the better understanding of nature, but also building better robots in the future. But generally speaking, we're really interested in how we can do significantly more complex robots in the near future. Because if we look at our body, it's the complexity is enormous. The complexity in our body is enormous, and the complexity in the task we can do is also enormous. So what we are doing with the robots today is considerably simpler to what 10-year-old kid can do. Right, our robot skills is probably something like a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, but no more than that. And we are struggling how we can bring the complexity of robots a lot higher to compete with the humans or other animals. And that's something we need to understand. And unfortunately, what we can do with really simple robots, and our robot is probably more useful than babies and the infants of humans. And because that's what we need in our industry scenes, in business. But what we want to do in the future is how we can make our robots closer to humans. And we need a completely different way of approaching such a problem, because we don't have a means to build the complex robots and interacting with the environment in interesting ways. So this is a kind of starting point of thinking about embodied intelligence. So what we are interested in is not only brain doing a lot of things in arbitrary body, but the body plays a very, very important role. If you don't have a good body, significant body, the brain cannot make use of it, no matter how great brain you have. So we are carefully looking at how this middle part of our body, like how our body dynamics morphology interacting with environment, given the information from the brain. And what's really important is looking at the details of how sensory system works, because that is where information is filtered out before going to the brain or computer system. And that's one aspect we're looking at. And another aspect, we're looking at the mechanical system, like how our mechanical system is reacting or interacting with the environment with a minimum input from the brain. And because that's something we need to think about before understanding how brain works. So one significant part of our research is actually understanding how mechanical system interact in the environment. And that's something I just want to show you briefly what kind of things we're doing. So the inspiration comes from this George Lauder experiment of the dead fish. So this is George Lauder is the professor in Harvard zoology and working on the underwater animals. And one of the really striking experiments he showed us is this dead fish experiments. This is a sweet water fish, that rainbow trout is able to swim against water flow. But the experiment he showed in this video is that this fish is completely dead, right? This brain is completely anesthetized before the experiment. And if you put this fish on the table, it doesn't move, right? It's completely dead. But as soon as we put this back in the water flow, it starts swimming. So this is really, really interesting inspiration for engineer, that how important the mechanical design is in, if you want to build a robot dynamic systems like this acting in the real world. So the reason why this fish is able to swim without brain functionality is because the body of the fish is designed for this environment. So there's a column in the waterfall. The waterfall is coming from left-hand side to right-hand side. But as soon as you have obstacles in the flow, you see the vortices around it, and this vortice is actually giving energy to the dead fish body so that it can propel against water flow. So this gives us a lot of inspiration. So we have been working a lot about how we can build a mechanical body before looking into the brain control, brain-based control. So one example of similar kind is the passive dynamic walker intensively studied in Cornell University, Andy Reina and Steve Collins. So this is a robot that makes use of passive dynamics. So there's no motors, no sensors, no brain. but no controller, but it can simply take advantage of potential energy converting into the kinetic energy so that it can show very natural walking behaviors without brain or without control. And I myself have worked on a lot of different brainless dynamic locomotion robots. So these are my PhD work, 15 years ago, where we look at how many different things robots can do with our brain. So all of these robots have motors in the body, but what motor is doing is very, very primitive things like oscillating the part of the body back and forth with fixed amplitude and fixed frequency, with the mechanical designs around it is well considered. So let's look at this dog robot. The dog robot actually doesn't have any sensors or any control. It's basically swinging 4 legs back and forth with the same frequency, but you can still turn right, turn left, and sometimes jump higher, sometimes go lower, and all these things are happening with the mechanical dynamics, and that's what we're interested in. So mechanical dynamics is kind of really interesting things to look at in order to understand how this dynamic behaviors and the interaction with the environment happening, and that's the main robotics research we are doing in the last 15-20 years. But then what we need to really think about now is how the brain and the body can grow together. And we're rather interested in how the body is shaping the way how the brain works rather than brain is controlling the body, because that's the kind of really fundamental question we want to understand, how such a complex computational brain can happen in the bottom-up manner. So we usually look at here and now time perspective, how we can get anything done in the here and now time scale. And sometimes we make use of machine learning techniques to get robots a little more adaptive. But this time scale here and now is very limited, right? Because if we don't have a very good body, the brain cannot really do much. So we need to make a body growing together with the brain. And in that context, we need to really think about the ontogenetic perspective, how brain and body grow together so that it can do more complex things. And that's the really next challenge. And ultimately, we want to go to the phylogenetic perspective, how robots can evolve over a longer period of time. And that's something we're interested in. So that sounds like a really, really crazy project from robotics point of view, because we need to do the mechanical change of the body in the robots. But I think this is a really good time to start thinking about this, because we have a lot of interesting technologies available. So that's what we're exploring in the concept of a robot genome project. So we're interested in how we can define the concept of genome in the robotic design process, right? So the genome gives some information about the phenotyping, like how we can make a robot physically built based on this genome information. And once the robot physical built a robot, it should be tested and give some feedback back in the genome level, so that we can do the iteration of design improvement over time. And that's one of the things that we have been working on in the last 10 years. And this is the kind of framework to understand how the brain and body grow together. So what we have been thinking about from technical point of view is really how to do the translation from information world to the physical world, namely phenotyping. And this is a bit technical and probably not very relevant to neuroscientists in this community, but I just want to briefly introduce some of the techniques that we developed in the last decade or so. So the important thing is how the robot can build anything mechanical automatically. And that's a really interesting challenge at the moment. But we have a lot of interesting functional materials for 3D printing and how to use robotic manipulators for assembling different kind of things. So here's the example that how a robot can do 3D printing of different parts and putting them together to change mechanical structure autonomously. So at the moment, we do a relatively simple thing, that how a robot can change its end effect, the robotic hand, in different ways. So we use this materials called the thermoplastic adhesive to do the 3D printing and attach and detach its an end effector in an autonomous way. So just by changing mechanical structure, this robot can do a lot more different kind of things because of this change of morphology. That's a kind of starting point of our the research of the robot genome. So this is really a lot of things we need to do technically, but what's really significant challenge is how we design system, right? So this example, a robot is able to fabricate all these grippers and so on by itself, but the design itself is given by humans. So we gave a design of design of these end effectors, and then robot fabricate by themselves automatically. But the real next challenge is how a robot can actually design such a mechanical structure by themselves. And that's one of the challenge we have been exploring. So this robotic invention, what we developed 5 years ago, is the robotic arm is able to handle many different kind of modules like this. We have a robotic, this is some blue, the large cube and small wooden cube, and they are kind of assembled together into a complex structure. And now this robot is assembling a little small structure like this. And then actually this small structure can act like a child robot, right? So this is a kind of artificial evolution we can run in the physical environment. That's a platform we built just to test how the evolution or the change of ontogenetic and the phylogenetic process can be simulated in the physical world. So what we did is basically this mother robot and child robot. Right? Mother robot is building hundreds of child robots and see evolutionary dynamics will continue in the physical world. So in this experiment, we built basically 10 random design of child robots, and then measure the performance of this child robots, right? So in this case, the child robots is evaluated with respect to locomotion distance, how far it can move in a certain time period. And then we pick up the best design out of this top 3 design out of this first generations, and then use this mechanical design information to pass them into the next generation, and then generate the 10 other designs and measure their performance and so on and so forth. And we can actually run the artificial evolution to design the child robots in a flexible manner. So just to give some examples here, right? So this is the robots evolved from this kind of experiment. At the beginning, most of the experiment, we see relatively simple robots, like one big cube and small cube attached to each other. And this already shows some sort of locomotion moving a little bit forward. If you have 2 active cubes together, it can do already some interesting locomotion behaviors. And if you have a larger body like this, you can do a lot more interesting behavior happening. And in this case, the larger body is actually more difficult to build from evolutionary point of view. But of course, the bigger robot can make a larger step forward. So therefore, it can be evaluated highly in the evolutionary process. So this is a kind of interesting experiments how, any mechanical design can be in principle automatically generated through evolutionary trial and error experiments. And this is the kind of platform we can start thinking about how brain and body can work together. So in this particular case, we are not only building mechanical design of this, but we also exploring how the control circuits behind this locomotion behavior is happening. So that's one of the research topics we are interested in right now. But of course, obviously there are many unsuccessful child robots on the way. So these are the kind of examples that the not really interesting behaviors come out during the evolutionary process. So we see a lot of cubes doing nothing. Like if you put one cube in the wrong orientation, it does nothing. Sometimes it's a really good design, but some just fall down because the balance is not very well maintained. In that case, this robot cannot do much. So this is a really interesting experiment in trial and errors, lots of things happening. And some of them are really difficult to build, right? So there are some cases that there's no pictures presented in the diagram. And in this case, the robots failed to build in the first place. So we could not really do experiments. And in that case, the building process should punish the evolutionary process at the same time. And that's one aspect we're looking at as well. So in the end, we did lots of experiments. In 1 month, we built 500 robots built and tested, and almost everything is automated by this mother robot. So the students are just doing a minimum work to get this the process running. But this is a really interesting way how we can start thinking about how robot brain and the body can come together. So then the interesting challenge here is really about how the brain and body come together. So the genome of this little child robot we're working on is actually the complex piece of information. So if you have 3 blocks like this, we need 3 genes in one genome. And each gene consists of 3 types of information. One of them is the module type, whether it's a big cube or small cube, or the construction process, how each of these cubes are connected to each other. So we defined a couple of different processes that the mother robot assembled these different cubes. So this corresponding to the mechanical growth of the biological systems. But on top of that, we also include some motor control, right? So there's a big cube have a motor inside. So we can actually operate these motors in different ways. So we can actually put together motor control principle process and body growth process together in genome, so that a child robot can grow all this thing together in one experimental evolutionary experimental setup. But what we found really interesting, at the same time, the problem is that the dimensionality of this design process is really huge, and it's very difficult to get anything of significant contribution of the brain function happens in this evolutionary process. So if you look at the fitness function evolution, we usually see increase of fitness function. So the over generation, we see more and more robots moving better. But on the other hand, we don't really know what's the reason of it. Is it the reason mechanical design is better, or the brain function is better? And this is really difficult to see at the moment, because we have a relatively small number of trials, but at the same time, we're optimizing it in a very complex landscape. So that's one of the challenges we're facing at the moment. But on the other hand, there are lots of interesting findings in these experiments. And one of them is that we can find these big robots doing really good performing behaviors. And that's something we can be found in the evolutionary experiments. But on the other hand, there are some really interesting experiments, the results like this. So this robot does some really chaotic behavior from our point of view, but somehow it moves really far away. And we don't really know why this robot is able to move long distance, because it's not very periodic, it's not very consistent, but it somehow works, right? So this is kind of things that the human designers are usually, human designers of robots are really difficult to build because it's not really periodic, and we don't really understand why this is working. But this is a kind of interesting result we found in this experiment. Okay, so this is a kind of brief introduction of how a roboticist could work together with a neuroscientist, and we have lots of interesting questions exploring in this area of research, and especially the frame of reference problem is one of the things we need to discuss with all of you. That the behavior of any embodied agents are really results of the interaction between system and environment. So if we are looking at only controller, if we're looking at only brain, sometimes it's very difficult to understand why this complex behavior happens. The perspective issues basically means that whether we should look at the complexity of the brain or controller internal mechanisms, or we should really look at the interaction of the physical interaction system and environment. And that's really the principle we need to think about, especially in the context of understanding complex interaction and embodied interaction in the system. So the complexity we observe in a particular behavior does not always indicate accurate complexity about the underlying internal mechanism, right? But we really need to think about the complexity of the interactions with the environment. And that's one of the challenges we're looking at in our research projects. And another interesting challenges we're trying to explore in our research project is how we can investigate the emergence of computation and possibly cognition, cognitive process, because what we are thinking about in the conventional Turing computation regime, that we always think about input and output relationship, and we always trying to come up with something consistent and deterministic. But what we are doing in the biological brain and the biological motor control process is we have a lot more stochastic and a lot more noisy, but sometimes it's very, very reliable. And all this, the computational process in embodied agent is something beyond the Turing computation. And we really need to think about what's the best way thinking about how such an emergence of computation can be studied, designed, and developed in our embodied agent. And that's something I want to really hoping to discuss with a neuroscientist in the near future. So in summary, we're really looking into complex robots. We are able to build complex robots, but the complex and meaningful embodied system environment interaction is still a really challenge, but this is the really fundamental important problem that we need to investigate in the future. And yeah, well, from a neuroscience point of view or information theory point of view, how the computation can emerge from the embodied system is a really fundamental question I want to really think about in the future. Okay, so obviously this is this 20-year-long research that we explain in the 40 minutes. And there are so many colleagues and friends and the sponsors supported our research project, and we need to credit all of my colleagues for this research, very exciting research in the last decades. And we're also interested in the collaboration in the future with a lot more interdisciplinary colleagues. I just want to give a very short advertisement of an Observatory for Human-Machine Collaboration, PAM Prime funding call. Deadline is actually coming this week, so it's unfortunately this is just too close at the moment, but we are still planning to do the PAM Prime funding call in the next years. So it's a really good time to be thinking about how this interdisciplinary research projects starting in this area. So we are running this Observatory for Human-Machine Collaborations based on the university academic seed funding, and then we have about £500,000 to distribute to promote the interdisciplinary collaboration project in the area of human-machine collaborations. And we have set up this website and the experimental lab in the engineering department. And we would like to really find out really exciting place where we can start the collaboration. So if you're interested in any research project related to human-machine collaboration, we're very interested in learning what you're doing. And hopefully we can discuss how we can set up such a project for the exciting collaborations. And finally, thank you very much for your attention. And there are lots of information, papers, videos available in our website. So if you're interested, please come visit us. And we're also looking for postdocs and PhD students. So please think about applying to these positions. All right, thank you very much. That's all for now. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Fumiya, for that fascinating talk. Join us next week for the last in the current series when we welcome Professor Giovanna Malucci, who will be talking to us about mechanisms to medicines in neurodegeneration. For all things neuroscience in Cambridge, follow the links below and follow us on Twitter at CamNeuro. See you next time.